everybody. My name is Sandra Kelly. I work in Garter Lane Arts Centre as Visual Arts and Education Manager. And as part of our current exhibition, Blue, we'll be speaking with Geraldine O'Neill, a visual artist. So hopefully you enjoy, and if you want any further information, make sure to go into garterlane.ie. So Geraldine, I'm just wondering if you could tell me a little bit about yourself and maybe how or why you became an artist.
Well, obviously my name's Geraldine, and I live and work in North Inner City, Dublin, with my family and 4 kids. I think why I became an artist, I don't think I had a pre-planned route. What happened was, at school, my favourite subject was art or science, and I loved them, and I just followed it. There was no pre-planned road. I went to NCAD, graduated in '93, then went back to do a master's, graduated in 2008, and all the time I continued working, making pieces and wandering and looking at the world around me and what was happening. And that's just what happened.
So I'm just wondering about your piece In This Brief Time. That's part of our exhibition Blue, which is a series of works belonging to the Arts Council collection. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that work and any other information that you'd like the viewers to know.
Well, I think what happened was, like I often use, I often paint my children in works, and kind of painting, or I'm mostly kind of an object or still life painter. It can be loosely described, although I kind of subvert things and put them into relationships with each other. But I think by painting your own kids, you give them a permanency that they don't actually have, and you're trying to pin down the fragility of life. And when I was this painting In This Brief Time, it kind of came out of a conference that I took part in, organised by Dr. Yvonne Scott, and in it she was kind of describing the dimensions of the human relationship with the physical environment around us, and really what a short brief time we have been on this earth, and yet how we've altered it so profoundly, and that the alterations that we've caused can be actually seen in the geographical layers of the earth, and it can be seen in the layers of the ice, and everywhere. And it's just a strange thing that we as a species, like, the world seems to promise us so much, and we depend so much on the world, and yet at the same time we're slowly destroying it. So in this brief time, what I did was I painted my kids, and there's kind of an air of vulnerability about them, and Siún has her hand on the shoulder of Macdara, and he's standing in front of a curtain, and it's in front of another painting by Pat Near. And Pat Near, he's a Northern European artist, and he's a fantastic painter, a topographical painter, great at getting little details and indigenous plants and everything else like that. But I kind of subverted that painting by painting a curtain in front of it, and the curtain kind of looks permanent, but it could easily fall down, and everything fall down with it. And Siún is there with Macdara, and they're looking out, so they're kind of returning our gaze, kind of saying, like, what are you doing? And in it, Macdara is holding a Minion Man balloon. He's obsessed with Minion Mans, but the eye has the eye of the Minion Man on the balloon, and again returning our gaze. And at the bottom of it, there's flowers painted. There's I think 2 irises and a dandelion. And even though, like, irises would be traditionally, there's a whole load of symbolism involved with them, and they traditionally represent the Virgin Mary, etc., etc. And they're bought plants and traditionally full of them. They're a value product, and the dandelion has no value. For me, there's no hierarchy between the plants. In fact, I would consider probably the dandelion's more important, as it provides pollen and important nectar for the bee early on in the season. And then on top of that is another kind of picture of a children's picture of a house. Now, I had intended something really a different image altogether, maybe taken from some sort of diagram of from the nano world, nanotechnology. But in the end, it just seemed more appropriate to use the child's image of a house making smoke, because often nature is represented in culture and in art and films, and everything else has been somewhat dreamy and beautiful and everything, and it is. But to survive in nature, we have to shelter from nature, we have to take care, and everything from thermodynamics and everything shows us that everything alters, and it just seemed, rather than making some sort of polemic kind of big statement with the last diagram on top, it seemed just more appropriate to make a more kind of gentle layer of the kids' drawing to try to pull the viewer in. And the painting, again, it's worked up in layers. I usually work painting up in layers, and I like to think of it like geographical layers, that if you peel back one layer and see something else, you peel back another layer, you see something else. And so it's just worked up in layers.
And that feeds into the next question that I was going to ask you about the process. How does work begin and end for you?
It always begins slowly and it always ends slowly. Like something might start as a germ of an idea. Like I tend to collect a lot of things. The way the studio is that I collect, different photographs, images, objects. I nearly have a dictionary of children's drawings, or a dictionary of interesting scientific diagrams and stuff like that. So things are collected rather than the traditional artist notebook. So I collect things, or I might hear something interesting, or I might hear a nursery rhyme that it'll be collected. Like the nursery rhyme in the painting is it goes like this: Rowley, Rowley, Susla, Falla, Rowley, Rowley, Nustan, Falla, the Jacob na Finas, Sugatam, Igurdi, Rowley, Rowley, Marvi, Shehana. So I'd heard that nursery rhyme before, and it's kind of akin to Humpty Dumpty, like you get something and if you break it, you might try to fix it, but you won't get the same thing back. So all these things have been collected over the studio, and originally I had started the painting and it was more, it was a different painting, but with the same figures and a different background completely. And I was about quarter way through, and I knew it didn't make sense. It could have worked visually, but it wouldn't have tied in with what I was trying to do. And then luckily I took part in the symposium, and slowly things began to get legs, and gradually I got the idea, and I had a kind of a new idea, and the drapery, and it became a much more prominent feature. It seemed to make sense, like to put in the drapery as if the world is a kind of stage, and this is how we construct it, or this is how we think about things, and how it could all, like it's all false, and how it could all fall down. And it seemed much more important to construct things like that, to say, like, this is our world. We think it's so secure and safe, and yet it could all fall down. So the picture format changed completely. So things always work really, really slowly. And usually when I start something, I know maybe midway through whether I'm going to be happy with something, or sometimes I don't, but I continue it. But in the end, there's often quite a bit of change on the way. Like, I hadn't intended to have the blue cloth in the foreground, but it kind of made sense to me to have blue cloth then in the foreground, just compositionally, but also to have a kind of there usually is a kind of duality in all my paintings, so it kind of reflected the fabric that was already in the painting, in the fabric of Holy Mary, and it was like as if it's a repeated pattern. And I had done an exhibition before called Many World Interpretation, agus Ruddy Ellen Nachid, and the Many World Interpretation, it's kind of this, I love reading about the nano world, because it's just mad, and anything, it's so counterintuitive. Nothing that exists, and it should exist according to our own kind of narrow minds and our understanding of the world around us. And they often have this kind of duality, or they have this spin theory in it and stuff like that. So anyhow, that's a long way of saying that often things happen at the end that you mightn't have fully planned out, but then it makes sense in the process of the making of it, or of how it'll look, or what you want. And I always feel like I say, a large painting like that, it's like a sentence, and you say a sentence, but you never quite get through what you want to get through. So then you have to make another one to make another sentence. And then the small paintings tend to be more like words, you know, that you might get a word, and you kind of hope that the jumble of them all together will somehow make sense at some stage. So it was worked how I made the painting. Physically, how I made the painting was I would have started off. I had this image of the kids, and they'd come in, and then it was a wondering of the orange against blue, and something in the look of them had struck me, and it was just saved away. And then I have finding Patner's paintings in an old copy of a book. It was actually written in Spanish, so I haven't a clue what they wrote, but often that's great because then you have to respond to something visually and looking at it. And then it was just gradual layering up of the images. The flowers, you know, that the choice of the flowers had to do with the seasonality of them. And when I was finishing, and again, the images, like the scribbles, which people often call them scribbles, but they kind of bring the things together. That was in a dictionary, not a dictionary, but old copybooks that I had. And, you know, it's very interesting to study the way children draw because they use the same symbols universally all around the world. You know, they have the kind of the circle, the Mandela symbol and that can be a sun with the legs sticking out, or it can be a person with the legs sticking out, or, you know, you'll have your house, and the house is usually about the same size as the person, and the flowers, whatever. And so they have this kind of stratification of understanding the world around them. And so it's like it's nearly like a dictionary of mark making or symbols that kids use, and they use them universally, regardless of culture or anything, all around the world, regardless whether you've access to traditional drawing materials or it's a stick and mud or whatever. And so I kind of feel I'm only just one step on from that original making thing. And so anyhow, the process, I start with I kind of draw out the painting with paint. I usually give it a kind of mid-tone color, and then I start working on layers, working from the back, moving forward. And the things like the flowers at the front of the painting, like the scribbles, they're the things that happen last, that kind of pull the kind of disparate elements all together to make it into something. And they're all usually formed by things I've collected. So it may start with a plan, but the plan is never fully formulated, if that makes sense.
And I'm just wondering, how come you selected paint to be your medium as an artist? Have you used other materials and kind of always went back to painting, or have you always kind of stuck with painting?
No, I would have used other material. I would have experimented a bit as an undergraduate. In 2008, I had an exhibition called Loan na Schleifte, which means Monday of the Mountains, which basically means Judgment Day, which death. And in that I had video, and I had a very large scale drawing. And the large scale drawing was kind of it was a kind of an interactive work in that I had started this. It was about 5 foot by 15 foot or thereabouts, and I had drawn in my style on one side, and then kind of carried it on with kind of more watercolor images and stuff. We just left boxes of pencils and crayons and stuff around to see what would happen. And at first, you know, children started to draw on it, but in a very careful way or whatever. And gradually, as more and more drawings were put onto the drawing, they became braver until it ultimately ended up with this huge white shark that somebody had done. So that was a really enjoyable project, because it started as my piece, but it was completely enriched by what the children did over the couple of months that the exhibition was on. And the other piece was it was a kind of a DVD piece of it started off as a peacock. I've often painted dead birds because you know, they started off as unsolicited gifts from people, and in painting them again, it's like as if you kind of give them, like, painting, number one, doesn't really make sense in this world if you think about it, because we live in a multi-image age, and yet painting takes so long to make. But by painting something, you kind of give it a sacredness. And even in the death, these beautiful songbirds, there was a kind of a transcendence, or you gave them a kind of beauty. But the magpie is an interesting thing. Like, we all know magpie, one for sorrow, two for joy. But it's also like there's loads of legends around it about saying that it used to be a peacock, but it was metamorphosized into a magpie for mocking Jesus on the cross and stuff like that. So in the video, it starts off as a magpie, as far as I remember, and then it's this kind of stop motion animation. It slowly metamorphosizes into a magpie, and the magpie's kind of beak opens and the head is temporarily replaced by a skull, kind of making reference to vanitas and memento mori. And in the background, the kind of a child's landscape is chalked in, and then this landscape is rubbed away, and the plastines peel back, and it returns to a magpie. And it's kind of, it's making references to a few things, but it's like a DVD painting, like a vanitas painting, but also it's talking about the taking objects and transforming them from one thing to another. A bit like the analogy of a painting, where you get your canvas, you get your paint tubes, and you make something else. And with painting the canvas, you make something else, and it becomes something else. So that was really, like, it was enjoyable. But I think paint, for me, it's more like a native language at this stage. Like, I know how it works, so I can do the things. Whereas with other mediums, I have to struggle to make it work for me. So I've always, like, I love painting, so I've always gone back to painting. And I don't believe there's any hierarchy among the different methods of making art. Art is making art, and they're all valid and all good.
And that's really interesting that that's come up in this section, because one of my final questions is, from researching you and reading loads of different articles about you and your practice, it seems like you're always referred to an old master, and I'm just wondering how you feel about that, because in one of the articles it was quoted and it kind of said neither fashionable or viable, but like you said, there's no hierarchy between different modes. So I'm just wondering what you think about that.
Oh, I'd like I never mind being yes, I've seen the articles, and like really like the articles were really good articles, and they really looked at the way I was making paintings and stuff like that. And I suppose what it's referencing is referencing the craft. And craft may be seen as a bad word. I don't think it's a bad word to know how things work. And also, for me, I feel immensely lucky that I have, that I can get the paint for the most part. Like, I do struggle with it, but to do what I want it to do. So then I can concentrate on what I'm trying to say. And, I don't do the big loud works. They're not polemic, but like, rather through the little details, I'm trying to kind of pull people in to make them look. And I don't really mind what way people see the works. They can act on different levels. Sometimes people will see all the references and understand them, and for other times people just say, oh, I like the way that it looks really real, or I like that color, whatever. But there's many layers to look at art, or to understand art, or to appreciate art. And so, like, no, I'm delighted when I'm called an old master.
And how do your children feel about sometimes being in your paintings? It must be strange for them, or are they completely used to it by now?
It's a funny one, because I don't post pictures of my kids on social media or do anything like that. I'm quite private that way, but I do allow people, I do have pictures of my occasionally pictures of my studio to let people into my practice. How do the kids feel? Well, sometimes they're reluctant modelers, they're not too happy. It'd be wonderful to paint from life, but that's not practical or feasible. They're quite shy, so you can see sometimes their look can be quite guarded. And it's they're always happy at the end. My 7-year-old would say, "Am I famous?" Which of course he isn't, but he likes the idea of being famous. But I think I'm just mom, you know, this is their norm, so that's what they're used to. So they don't mind, and they kind of standard pose. But normally, like I don't have when I'm trying to get the images. I might have the props around them or whatever, but they actually make the pose. So it's like as if they have some function in the author function, and they make the pose, or they give the look or whatever, and hopefully I manage to capture it and put it in. And I think I suppose, like when I'm making the paintings, I'm making the paintings through my kind of narrow field of vision that I have around me, but hopefully I'm able to address some issues that are a bit wider than the narrow field of vision that's around me, if that makes sense.
That's really great. And I'm just wondering if, as an artist and a lecturer, is there any advice that you could give to artists who might be starting out or maybe even mid-career?
Yeah, I just think make the work. What was told to me when I by my tutor at college, Kerry Clark, and he just said, make the work. You know, put it in. Try to put it into as many things as you can. Don't worry about refusal or rejection, because that's just the nature of things. And just, if possible, find a safe space so you can make your work and go back to your work without it being disturbed. It is hard to be an artist. You have to juggle and everything. I don't teach anymore, but it is hard to try to carve out that space, you know, that time. So if you can find time or buy yourself time and have a physical space where to go back, it's much easier to make the work rather than having to clear up all the time. Yeah, that's it. And just have and don't talk yourself out of making stuff. And don't. Sometimes you can do this. You can overanalyze as you're starting to make a piece, and everything can become too scary. Just try to do it.
That's really wonderful advice. And do you want to tell us about any up and coming projects that you have?
No, I'm not sure what I'm going to do next. I suppose I'll try to work towards a new body of work. No, I'm just going to keep working. My work tends to be slow, so it takes time to emerge. You know, it would be nothing it's nothing for me to kind of spend 6 months or up to a year on a large painting. It can just sometimes take that amount of time, and I don't mind, because really that amount of time is a short time if you think about the whole concept of time. Yeah.